Hey, welcome back to Alice Customs Project Car TV. Today I am working on my International Scout and I'm trying to get the wipers working. So I'm in the process of rewiring the whole truck. Like any other vehicle, we've got a wiper motor and a wiper switch, and somehow or another the wiper arms move and all of that. Well, on the International Scout, it uses pretty plain Jane looking 3-wire motor, and it grounds, this particular version grounds through the body, the chassis of the truck. So the 3 wires are there for low, high, and park. It's a 2-speed motor. And there's a switch under the dash that looks like this. Has that little arm off of it, and a circuit breaker mounts to that little arm. And so you bring power into one side of the circuit breaker, that powers up the circuit. And International did something kind of weird in that this motor needs power all of the time. So now I'm no expert on this. I'm trying to quote what I've read on the internet, what I've kind of figured out on my own, and so take it all with a grain of salt, but here's what I've come up with. The switch, there's really nothing super special about the switch, although to get a factory replacement switch is pretty darn expensive. This motor does function, but none of it really works right. And when you rewire the Scout, or Internationals probably in general, they did a lot of different kind of wiring, and this is where the weird stuff comes in. So this is a 3-wire motor grounded through the chassis. You've got a park, a high and a low, and as I understand it, most 2-speed motors go to, when you put power on them, they go to low, and when you turn the switch, you add power to an additional field, and it makes the motor go faster. Take that for what, grain of salt. As I understand the way the International works is, it essentially works like in high all the time, and when you go to, low, it's like halving the circuit somehow to make the motor only go half speed. I don't know whether it's kind of shorting out the motor or just what it does, but it works very different from any other brand that I know of, which makes rewiring a Scout a challenge because this motor will not work with a traditional switch. You would have to have this switch, and you could make all this work. You just have to run the power the same way the factory did. And I've got some schematics that I drew up, so I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. All of that said, something in my whole system, I'm rewiring the truck, something in the whole system doesn't actually work the way we would want. And so I was looking for a alternate method. Also thought it would be cool to add a few features, intermittent wiper. Why? I don't know. How much am I going to drive this thing in the rain? But I'm going to kind of scan along here, and we're going to go over in detail what the Scout has, and then we're going to go over what I'm doing in place of that. And hopefully you guys can get it all. I'll put schematics up on the screen. I will also probably put you a link. I'm trying to think how I'm going to do this, but I think what I'll do is put a link to a page on my website that will have the schematics so you can download the picture and print it out and look at it. So I'll put it on screen. You can freeze the screen there if you want. Please forgive me, but I realized in the editing of this video I'd lost, or I don't know, somehow or another I didn't have this information. So this is the original wiring diagram for a Scout 2 in 1972, and I believe this is all the way through to 1980, but I'm not positive on that. This is our switch that I was showing you. It has 4 pins. One of the pins goes directly to the circuit breaker. That's that metal tab that's hanging off. The other pin goes straight to the ignition, and actually on the Scout I believe this goes straight to a 12-volt source. It goes through a fuse, but not an ignition source, if I'm not mistaken there. Anyway, then we've got, that's the P, and then we've got W, A, and F. And when you look up the wiring harness on the Scout, or look at the wiring harness directly, everything is a green, dark green wire, which you'll see a little later in the video. But they have printed on them the circuit number and then the gauge of the wire, which is kind of helpful. So A here is 82B, goes up, goes through the connector on the firewall that goes to the rear of the truck. The rest of these pins would have stuff like brake lights and turn signals and stuff like that. But it goes into pin N, as in November, and up. And then on my wiper motor, it goes into the black wire. 82C goes over, it goes through pin O on that same connector, and it hooks to the red wire. And pin 82A goes through the middle there to U and back and hooks to the green wire. So that takes care of A, W, and F, and then, or I'm sorry, A, P, and F. And because it has not only the connector that goes up to the circuit breaker, but it has its own circuit, the P here. And then the W is washer. So it goes over through the front connector harness, and I didn't get the pin number on that front connector, I apologize. But then to the washer pump. And so you can see that this system always has 12 volts at the switch, and the switch controls the motor directly. So all of these wires have to be able to carry all of the power for the motor, and then the motor is grounded directly to the chassis. And what you're going to see with our new design, not only are we going to send motor, power to the switch, we're also going to be sending power directly to the motor. So the switch is controlling parts of the field of the motor, but has power so that it can control the washer pump as well. So it can take some lighter gauge wire. You could actually run it with 18 gauge wire through the harness and maybe run a 16 gauge to your washer pump. But then 18, then you would just have one heavy power wire coming into your motor itself. And that's all on the new one. I'll show you that in a little bit here. But again, I apologize that this wasn't filmed at the same time, so hopefully the lighting's good and you understand it. But we'll get back to the rest of the video. Thank you. The plan here is we are going to make use of a much more modern motor that is readily available at, say, Napa Auto, O'Reilly's, AutoZone, Rock Auto online. I got mine off of Amazon once I'd found the part number I wanted to use. And that part number for me is a Cardone part, 85431. There is also a Napa part number 49-900, that would get you the part, and it was available. I just kind of picked the least expensive version that I could get the quickest. So it wasn't 100% the least expensive there. And in fact, this is a new part, and you could get it as a rebuilt part, but it was like an extra week out, and I'm wanting to get some of this stuff done. So what that looks like is just another motor. Does not have an arm on it, so we've got to solve that problem. When I got it, it has a round connector on it, which in the ones I've done this kind of project before, both on the orange 66 Chevelle quite a few years ago, for those of you who've been with the channel a long time. And before that, on Robert Kibbe's white 64 Chevelle, did the same thing there. We converted a XJ motor to work with their truck or their cars, and so I went back to what I knew. Now I've already converted this plug to a GT connector from the round connector, but I'm going to explain to you where the wires are, and you can bet that none of these motors are going to be wired the same unless they were being wired on the same day. And in fact, this one, I noticed this white wire has the heat shrink doesn't actually cover the whole joint, so I've got to fix that. But once you get your motor, now once I cut this off, I was committed to, I owned this motor, so I needed to make sure it worked first, but I was having trouble getting all my stuff on these little pins. I finally just decided I was committed, cut it off, was able to strip the wires back, and then I could put alligator clips on all the wires and test everything to make sure I had it figured out. So be careful about cutting it. A great solution. What I did on the other two cars that I mentioned is I went to the junkyard and got a used drop-in wiper arm assembly. It's all one component. It has the arms, the pivots, the motor, the little pigtail, and then I had them cut about a foot of the factory body side part of the connector, so I would be able to use a factory connector here. I didn't want to, it's Sunday, I didn't want to be going to the junkyard trying to figure this thing out, so that never happened. But I got this one done. I'll work with this connector, and then should I ever need to put another motor in it, we will have to put a new connector on it. And that's just something I'm going to have to deal with, I guess, in the future. So in addition to that motor, I'm then also using a different switch. Now, you can buy this switch quite a few places. It, I think, is listed for a Freightliner truck. Also, Ron Francis Wiring sells the same switch, different connectors on the end. It comes with a bunch of square connectors. I have a couple of these. And then you're going to need some bolts to bolt this. It's metric, so we're going to need some bolts to bolt it to the factory mount, because these are standard and we're going to be doing metric. So I bought a kit of metric bolts and nuts off of Amazon so that we have some choices. I believe they're 6mm. We're going to figure out how long we need, and then I'll pass it on to you, and maybe that'll be all you need. You'll need 3 of them and have it all figured out. So in the description, I will have a link to the motor, a link to the switch, and a link to the bolt kit that I bought. That should be most everything you need, except you're also going to need the factory bracket, so don't get rid of that. And we need the arm that is on here, and it is like, I guess, welded, riveted, something on. But we're going to need this arm, and we're going to have to modify it to work with our motor. That's it. This is not a huge project once you know how the wiring works and how we're going to get this done. I drew out another fancy schematic, and we're going to go over that real quick. Let me set it down and get the camera over here. Okay guys, so this is my updated version with intermittent wipers, and I'm going to show you that it doesn't matter what color the wires are coming out of the back of the motor. What's important is where they're at on the motor and what they do. So first things first, we'll talk about the red and the white. They are over here on the motor side, and one of them is a low, one is a high. Doesn't matter right now which. We'll figure that out in a second. Then we have 3 wires going into the center of this control system, and in there, I've never taken this apart, but it's basically a switching mechanism. So one of the wires is a ground. It's black in this case. It's the one furthest that way. Then the middle wire is gray on mine, and this outside wire is green. Well, the easy one to figure out is the middle wire. It is what is number 2 here, and that is representing the park position set or wire. The black wire, the way you know is because it's got an additional black wire coming to it, going over here to the case to ground the case. So that is this wire coming out, going to ground, becomes pin 4. So now we've settled the far one. The middle one is here. Number 1 is going to be green. So if we kind of follow our original connector, looking at the back of the connector, from the inside there's 2 extra holes that aren't getting used. That's the X's being represented there. We've got gray over here on this side. We've decided that's pin 2. That's the park position. We've got green. We've got number 1. It's green. That's this one here. We need to put 12 volts on there. It needs to be switched and fused. So off the ignition switch and fused. Then we've got red coming out the center bottom. So it doesn't matter what color your wires are. It's the position that we care about. But mine's red. That's the high motor control. So red over here on the motor. That's high. Then that one next to it is white right here. That's the low, so white is the low speed. And then we've got the ground, which is black, coming off this far side, pin number 4. And that's, so looking at that is how you can figure out what your factory one is if you want to cut that plug off and not go to the junkyard trying to get a body side connector for this. Now, I've converted mine to this flat 5-pin. Here it is. We've got the same wires going in, and once they go into the connector, we're going to use the switch wire colors to define what we're doing between the switch and here and the motor. So on this, we'll be connecting all of these wires We have a white, a yellow, a red, a brown, a black, and a blue. And again, these colors don't really matter, except that it's pretty easy. Every one of the switches that I've found, no matter where I've bought them, the wire colors have been the same. So that has made it easy. And what we're going to go through here is white is the high speed, yellow is the low speed for the motor control, blue is park, black is ground, red is 12 volt plus, again needs to be switched and off an ignition source, so you can connect, in reality you can connect the two together. And then brown is what goes to the wiper motor. So when you push this to run the the washer motor rather, so when you push this, brown is energized from the red. So all it does is pushing this connects red and brown, and you get power over to your washer motor to spray the windshield. That's it. It's pretty simple. The nice thing though is you have off, you have intermittent, low, and high. So we have 2 speeds plus intermittent, and we can do that with the Cherokee XJ motor. So let's wire it up and I'll show you how it works. Alright, so here we have it. This is actually a different switch, same exact kind of switch, but okay, so we have the motor through the connector that we created, and then I created a short harness. And when you get these motors, they come with these black connectors already on them. So I just made some connectors that would work with those. Whereas on this one, I would have had to protect every one of the wires while I was doing this testing. But we're also, so we needed a 12 volt source, power source. We've got that over here. That goes to my Kaiweets. So that's coming off my Kaiweets benchtop power supply. So we'll get that turned on. You can see we got 12.9 volts. Right now it's drawing 0 amps. That's fine. And then back here, so the switch is in the off position, and here is intermittent low, and it'll time for however long it needs to. So probably 30 seconds or something there. And we can turn that up. You know, that's intermittent, the shortest intermittent delay. And then here's low and high. Back to low and midway through the intermittent. Okay, now I'm going to turn it off. I'll be taking these connectors off, doing yet another probably GT type connector to work it into the harness. But we now know the whole system actually works. And the only thing that we have to do off of this motor still, like I said, is get this bracket and this arm, and then this arm we'll have to figure out some way to mount it. There is a nut and all of that here, so assuming we can get this cleaned up enough to fit on this shaft, we're all set. And the only thing we have to figure out is where the park position is so that the wipers are down when the motor is off. That's it. And the way we're going to kind of figure that out is we're going to put this motor in park and then just match the clock position with the arm on the new motor. Put a little flag on here again so maybe you can see it. So here's the motor. Got it wired up to the factory switch through the factory harness. There's low, high, and there it is parked. We can see it parks again. So we can see there's the park position that we are after when we set up the new motor with this arm. Now, I guess take a good look where the motor is, what the position, the bracket's facing down, is sitting on the tabletop. If you don't have a factory harness to get your motor into park position, I don't know of an easy way to wire it up to do it without a factory switch. So take a good look at the clock position. It's slightly less than horizontal compared to the motor. That's the best I can give you on that. However, we now have that information, so I will kind of draw a line, you know, straight through there onto the motor, get myself a pretty good idea. Then we'll take this arm off and put it on the other motor from the XJ. And obviously the switch was working. I could rewire this system to work. So again, if I'm not going to use this, I'm upgrading, if you will. And if somebody later wants this whole setup, I will probably make them a really good deal on it. So let's move on to getting this arm off of here. Now what I think I'm going to do is clamp this down to the table, take these 3 screws out, and then get a grinder and just knock the head of that post off there. See if we can't pull that thing off. All right, we got it off. So on our new motor, get it roughly the same location, just a little down from horizontal. Now the new motor has 2 flats on the stud and then a nut to hold it in place. So all I think we're really going to have to do, so we're just going to cut that slot open parallel to the sides of this bracket or this arm, and really shouldn't be too hard. We'll just get a marker, kind of line out where we think it needs to be, and then we'll get a file out the inside of it. Put that in the vise, and took about 3 minutes. So I just took a round file and opened up the bottom and opened up the top to the depth of the star, and then used a small triangle file and squared up the sides just a little bit. It was very close to fitting. It's a nice snug fit now. It sits, the motor arm or the motor spindle, this flat part up here, sits a little proud of this arm. So I think I'm going to find a washer that will just slide down around the outside diameter of that and put that on there to help lock it down, and then we'll put this nut on and we're all set. Alright guys, so here it is. Now putting this bracket on, I had to have the arm off, so of course I already had it off on the factory motor, so I don't know if there would have been a trick where I could have maneuvered it over it, but the stud sticks up high enough here that I was having trouble trying to get it through that hole. So just leave it. I'm going to be taking this off and painting the bracket and painting the arm anyway, but just so you know. Additionally, in putting it on, I had to flex the bracket right through where this hole is, and this is where the wires came through before, so you could run the wires back through there. I'm not going to. I'll figure out different routing. I didn't want them getting pinched in there, but I had to flex the bracket a little bit to get it to drop over the studs, and then it bolted right on. There's zero problem with this Jeep motor on there. My new motor came with 3 bolts. These are 6mm by 1.0 for the thread pitch. Came with 3 lock washers, and they're 14mm long, or like 13.77 or something like that. I prefer, rather than having the lock washer and all that, having this serrated bolt head, serrated head bolt on there. It also gives a little wider flange. So these are 6mm 1.0 pitch by 12mm, plenty long enough. There is a washer on here between the rubber and the bolt. That washer came off of the factory motor. It was underneath the, you can see on here, the factory motor has a washer on the bottom where the motor sits against the rubber backside of the rubber plate. This one, the new motor didn't need it because of the way the arms are. They trap the rubber in there, but you can see those would come right off anyway. But then there was a washer under this flathead screw that I just reused. It fit perfect for 50 years. It fits just fine now. 10mm wrench for all 4 bolts, and that's it. And honestly, other than figuring out the wiring, which I've shared with you, the whole project of putting this whole thing together is about 25 minutes, including filing the arm, figuring out which bolts. Like I said, I'll list the bolt kit that I bought, but this has washers and nuts and the flared, and this was like $10 or $12. I mean, so it's not particularly, you know, a free cheap thing, but you get a lot of metric bolts out of it. The nut came with the arm, but I had bought that kit figuring it would be the same thread, and it had nuts in it. The wiring took me a couple hours to figure out, and the reason is I started looking up stuff online, and I found a guy who had figured out how to wire one of these motors up using a relay and just a toggle switch. And I was like, oh, well, that's not a bad idea, you know, maybe I'd share that with you guys. I could not figure out how to make his wiring harness diagram work with this motor. I played with it and played with it and played with it. I just finally gave up, went back to basics, printed out a schematic for the base model version of the Jeep Cherokee, and again, 95 to 01 or 89 to 01. So pick a 95 model. I believe that's what I did, is just picked the 95 model XJ, printed the schematic off the internet, didn't pay anything for it. Took me 15 minutes after that, you know, after finding it and printing it, 15 minutes later I had the whole thing working. Obviously don't trust everything you find on the internet. Even this video, take it with a grain of salt. Like I've tried to explain that wire colors may be different, but I tried to show you the position of the wires in that round connector. So use that information with a little grain of salt. You know, every motor is going to be different, but you see it works. You got basically a $100 motor and a $30, $35 switch. Let me pull that up. So just to go through it, the bolt kit cost $19.99. I was wrong. Got it off of Amazon. I'm sure there's cheaper ones out there. The motor was $108.20. Again, got it off Amazon. And the wiper switch that we're using. Now the nice thing is I'm going to put the factory knob back on here, so we won't be reusing this black knob. I'll put a factory chrome knob on there that I saved when I took the truck apart. And it's $38.89. Again, links for all 3 of those will be in the description. They're Amazon associate links, means the channel makes a little money. When you click on them, it doesn't add anything to your price, just does a little kickback towards the channel, so we make a little money off the deal and help support making these videos, because obviously I'm using these for me, but you know, sometimes I do some of these projects and I don't really have a use for them at the time. I think it's going to be a cool idea. Now, like I said before, I've used this motor and this switch on other projects. So sometimes the adaptation is this easy. Sometimes you spend a lot more effort figuring out how to get the motor mounted and other stuff. But the wiring being usually the hard part for most of us, especially when you're trying to figure out motors and parks and high and low and all of that, this one's a pretty darn easy little project. So we'll be cleaning up all the wiring and getting this mounted in the truck as soon as I get the dash back from paint. Let's compare that real quick to a factory switch. So we are 140, 100, let's call it $160 into it, buying the bolt kit. $160. Let's compare the $160 for a whole new system that will be long-term reliable and parts are easy to find. Like I said, found them all on Amazon. I know the motor you can find at Napa and AutoZone and everywhere else. In stock maybe, but definitely 1 or 2 day service. The switch is actually for like a Peterbilt. So this is compatible with, a Peterbilt semi-truck. So probably in 1,000 different vehicles. And I know Ron Francis Wiring sells that switch also. It's an identical switch. They just already have changed out the knob on their more expensive version of it. But again, $38.89 for that switch, $108 for the motor, $16 for the bolts. If we go looking, and I'm just looking on the internet, that's kind of why I'm looking down over and over. So I'm looking on the Binder Boneyard. I'm not picking on anybody. This is just what I'm searching today. They might not be available tomorrow. And they could be double the price or half the price if they find a whole new, you know, a whole bunch of them somewhere. But a used switch, $119.99 for the switch and circuit breaker. I can tell you the circuit breaker is worth about $5.99 most places. If we go to IH Parts America, they have a new old stock switch and circuit breaker. Honestly, doesn't look much better than the one I saw used on the other site. $129.95. So $120, $130 to replace the switch. Here's a place that's selling, this is scoutparts.com. They're selling a switch that they say can be used in replacement. I haven't tested it myself, whatever. Comes with a knob that looks just like this. And they're quoting the price at $89.98. So potentially a new version of a switch that would have replaced the old ones that start looking for used and other stuff. Here's one on the same site. Scout 2 new old stock. So it is new. Looks pretty rough. They're asking $396.56 for the switch. Let's see if we can find a wiper motor. So I quickly ran a search on the internet. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. Found three hits. One of them they didn't have it in stock, so it wouldn't matter what price they were asking. I found one on eBay, definitely used, looks pretty rough, $125 plus shipping. And found another one that's supposedly rebuilt, and this is from IH Parts America again, and they're asking $279.95. Now, if you're getting the one, oh, they actually do show a couple different pictures. Looks like it comes with the bracket. It obviously has the arm on it since it's welded on, and it's rebuilt, looks all cleaned up. It's $279.95 and a $275 core charge. That tells you right there, guys. The motor I'm setting aside and the switches that I'm setting aside are worth $400 apparently. But if you got a bad motor, you got a bad switch, maybe it's worth buying that $89.95 switch and seeing if that will work. But if not, this setup for $160 gets you modern everything, including intermittent wiper, which I think is kind of cool. Is it necessary? No. I mean, we got wiper arms that are what, 11 inches long or something? How much is it really going to do? There you go. A way to modernize your Scout with off-the-shelf parts. Nothing exotic. Didn't take very long once I figured out the wiring, and I've shared that with you, so you guys should be able to knock that out in 15 or 20 minutes, just sitting down and making your connections. And then if you're rewiring your Scout anyway, start with this project so that you know where you need to run your power wires. You're going to need one at the dash for the switch, one at the motor for the motor itself. You can tee in and run one wire that goes to both places, or you can wire the wire off early and go to both and be on one fuse. That part's not going to matter, but you need a power source to both the motor and the switch in this case. That's it, guys. I hope that's helpful. I hope somebody finds something in there that they will make use of in the future. And like I said, I'll put links in the description for all the parts. I'll put a link in the description for where I post the diagrams that I built or that I drew up, and I will include the original diagram so you know what wires you're chasing off. Because if you're redoing your original Scout, you've got power at the dash. All you've got to do is get power out there to the motor, which, you know, there are plenty of sources under the hood to pull power. You would just want it to be an ignition, a power source that is supplied on and off with the ignition switch and fused. But the wire that goes to the back of the switch on the original OEM setup could be just run out there to the motor, just through the firewall and up to the motor, and you'd have everything you need. Again, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all the other YouTube stuff. Comment if you like seeing this kind of content. Tell me what else you want to know about, what else I can build for you. We'll see you again next time on Alice Customs Project Car TV.